Greetings, traveler. I'm glad to see you in my tavern. Here you may rest after a hard road, drink a mug of good ale, and listen to an old, honest witcher's tale, one that smells of smoke, winding roads, and silver coins. The evening mist rolled low across the Temerian plains, spreading thin as gossamer over the blackened fields where war had lately passed. The air smelled of ash and rain, of things burned and things left behind. A lone rider guided his horse along the rutted path that led toward the ruins of Bedtime, a place whispered of in taverns, where folk crossed themselves at its mention. The rider's cloak bore the stain of long travel, his silver hair tied back from a face marked by pale scars and sharper eyes. Geralt of Rivia, witcher, monster slayer, outcast by design and trade. He rode without haste, his mount, a chestnut mare named Roach, moving steady despite the mud sucking at her hooves. The wind tugged at his cloak, making it flutter like the wings of some great gray bird. From the crest of the hill, Geralt looked down upon what remained of the village. Once, Bedtime had been a modest but thriving place. Cottages whitewashed with lime, wheat fields stretching to the edge of the forest, and a keep that had guarded the road to Vizima. Now the cottages were burned, the fields fallow and black. The keep itself was nothing but a silhouette of ruin against the evening sky, broken towers and a collapsed gate where crows perched in rows. Geralt urged Roach forward. Somewhere beyond those ruins waited the cause of his journey, a haunting the villagers called the White Bride. He had heard the tale first, from a Temerian sergeant over a campfire 3 nights ago. The man had told it between gulps of watered ale, his voice trembling as he described a woman in a torn bridal gown who drifted through the fog at night, her eyes like pale moons, her voice calling the names of the dead. Those who heard her call never returned. Not a wraith, the sergeant had said, shaking his head, nor a noon wraith. We tried witcher's signs and charms. Nothing worked. She kills soldiers, peasants, anyone. No pattern. That was enough for Geralt.
Ghosts didn't rise without reason, and no curse bound itself without a wrong to anchor it. The mention of a buried silver sword, one bearing an oath once spoken by witchers of Kaer Morn, had sealed his decision. Now he reined in before the village square. Only 3 houses still stood. The alderman, a gaunt man with eyes like candle stubs, stepped from the shadow of one. You came, he said softly, almost in disbelief. You're the witcher? Geralt nodded. Tell me about your ghost. The alderman led him to the hearth of the last standing tavern, where a few surviving villagers huddled together. Their faces were gray with fear. The tale they told was simple but cruel. The Lady of Tyne had been betrayed on her wedding night. Her betrothed, a knight sworn to protect the keep, had instead opened its gates to Nilfgaardian raiders in exchange for gold. When she learned of it, she threw herself from the battlements in her bridal gown. Since then, said the alderman, she walks. White as milk, eyes hollow. She kills any who trespass the old keep or plow near its walls. It's been 3 years, Witcher. We can't plant, can't live. The Lord's treasury's gone, but we scraped coin enough to pay you. If you could make her rest. Geralt's yellow eyes flicked to the coins on the table, dull and worn from too many desperate hands. He pushed them back. I'll take what you can spare when it's done, he said. The villagers exchanged uncertain glances. Outside, the wind rose, carrying with it the faint chime of something distant.
like silver bells. Geralt's hand fell automatically to the hilt of his sword. Not the steel one, the silver. The blade gleamed faintly in the hearthlight, as if it too had heard the sound. "Where's the keep?" he asked. "Half a league north," said the alderman. "You'll see the old well. Don't go past it after dusk." Geralt gave a short nod, pulled up his hood, and stepped into the twilight. The road wound between gnarled trees and broken stones. Fog crept from the marshes and wrapped itself around his boots. Somewhere nearby, a nightjar trilled, and the sound of its wings faded into silence. The Witcher's medallion vibrated lightly against his chest, a sure sign that magic, or something like it, stirred ahead. He reached the old well just as the moon rose, a pale, swollen orb veiled by drifting clouds. The stones of the keep beyond shimmered faintly, silvered by moonlight. But above the gate, where ivy trailed down like tattered veils, he saw her, a woman in white. Her gown fluttered though no wind stirred. Her hair, black as pitch, streamed behind her like smoke. Her eyes glowed faintly, their light shifting between sorrow and fury. When she moved, it was soundless, and yet Geralt felt the weight of her presence press against his chest. The White Bride. He did not draw his sword, not yet. He had learned long ago that most monsters were born of pain, not malice. He raised his hand slowly, the sign of Axii flaring faintly as he spoke, his voice low and calm. "Lady of Tyne," he said, "I've come to end your torment." The specter tilted her head. For a moment her eyes flickered, pale light trembling like candle flame. Then her lips parted, and from them came a whisper, thin as the breath of winter. "Oath broken." The air grew cold. Frost crept along the stones, silvering the ground around his boots. Geralt's medallion shuddered wildly. He barely had time to move before the ghost screamed, a sound like shattering glass, and the night erupted with her fury. The Witcher drew silver, and the battle for Dun Tyne began. The scream echoed through the ruins like a blade through glass, scattering the mist into spiraling shapes. Roach reared and bolted a few paces back, her eyes white with terror. Geralt stood firm, the silver sword gleaming in his grip, its runes catching the pale light of the moon. The White Bride hovered before the gate of the keep, her gown rippling as though beneath unseen water, her hair floating in strands that moved against the wind. Geralt muttered a curse under his breath and raised the sign of Yrden. A circle of faint violet light burned into the earth around him. The moment the ghost crossed its edge, the wraith fire shuddered and the bride's form faltered, her scream twisting into a long, keening wail. "Broken oath," she whispered again, her voice both near and far. "Faith betrayed, love undone." Her hands reached toward him, slender, pale, ending not in fingers, but in trailing ribbons of white mist. They brushed the Yrden's edge and burned, dissolving into smoke. Geralt held his ground, studying her movements, her voice, the shape of the curse that clung to her like a shroud. "This isn't simple vengeance," he muttered. "Something binds her, something strong." He stepped forward and struck. The silver sword sliced through the air with a hiss. The wraith shrieked, her form flickering like a candle about to go out, but she did not vanish. Instead, the mist drew back, swirling into the shadowed gate of the keep. The Witcher waited a heartbeat, then lowered his blade. He knew better than to pursue immediately. Spirits were cunning. They drew their hunters into traps woven of grief and memory. He sheathed the sword, took a deep breath, and examined the ground. Where the bride had stood, frost had withered the grass to white ash. The air smelled faintly of lilies and decay. "All right," he murmured. "You want me to come inside?" The gate of the keep loomed ahead, its wooden doors long since rotted away, leaving only jagged posts and twisted iron hinges. Beyond lay the courtyard, a scatter of fallen stones, a well filled with black water, and the remnants of a great hall whose roof had collapsed inward. The moonlight silvered the rubble, and in that pale glow Geralt saw faint tracks, prints in the frost, the delicate impressions of bare feet. Leading toward the hall, he followed. Inside, the silence was thick. The shattered windows let in narrow beams of light, revealing tapestries stiff with age, tables overturned, goblets half buried in dust. The stench of death had long faded, leaving only the cold, empty air of abandonment. Yet beneath it lingered something else, a scent Geralt recognized all too well. The iron tang of spilled blood. He crouched near the center of the hall. There, beneath the rubble, lay a skeleton. The armor was blackened and broken, the helm caved in, but the shape of the breastplate marked its owner as a knight. One gauntleted hand still clutched a sword, its pommel carved with the sigil of Tyne, a falcon rising from flame. "Her betrothed," Geralt muttered. "The traitor." He reached for the sword, intending to lift it and inspect the runes, but the moment his fingers brushed the hilt, cold flooded his veins. A voice whispered, soft, pleading, full of sorrow, "Do not take it." He swore by it and broke it. Geralt froze. The voice wasn't his imagination, it was hers, the bride's, echoing from somewhere close, perhaps even within the walls themselves. He released the sword slowly. "Then tell me what you want," he said. For a moment there was only silence. Then, from the far end of the hall, a light shimmered, a faint figure materializing beside the ruined dais where once a throne had stood. She stood there as she had before, her gown immaculate though torn by death, her eyes dim pools of light. "Irina of Tyne," Geralt said, naming her aloud. The wraith's head turned sharply toward him, as though the sound of her name stirred what little humanity remained. "You seek peace," he continued, his voice calm but firm. "To rest, but you cannot. Something still binds you. Tell me what it is, and I'll end it." Her lips moved. For a moment, no sound came. Then she whispered, "The oath." Geralt frowned. "What oath?" She drifted forward, her hand passing through a broken pillar, her voice carrying like a breeze. "He swore upon the silver sword, to guard our house, to stand true until death. He broke it, sold us to the Black Sun." Her tone darkened, the spectral light in her eyes flaring. "He broke it, Witcher, so now none shall rest." Geralt's eyes narrowed. A sword, a vow, and betrayal. Old magic, the kind that twisted honor into a curse. "If the oath was sworn on the blade," he said slowly, "then the curse lies with it." The wraith tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "You know the old ways. I've seen worse." He stepped closer, ignoring the chill creeping into his bones. "Let me take the sword, Lady Irina. I'll break the vow properly. End what he began." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she raised her hand and pointed to the dais. "Not that sword, the one buried with me." Geralt blinked. "Buried with you?" The wraith nodded once, the gesture slow and solemn. "In the chapel beyond the hall, beneath the rose window. My grave is there." Before he could reply, her form wavered. The wind rose suddenly, scattering dust through the hall. When it settled, she was gone. Geralt sighed through his teeth. Always the crypt, he muttered. He crossed the courtyard, his boots crunching over frost. The chapel lay half buried. Beneath fallen stone, its door cracked open. Inside, moonlight streamed through the shattered rose window, painting the floor in pale fragments of color. He knelt before the tomb at the center, its lid carved with a likeness of a sleeping woman, beautiful, serene, and dressed in bridal finery. The inscription beneath the effigy read simply, Lady Irina of Tyne. May her vows bind her to none. Geralt drew his dagger and pried open the tomb. The stone groaned, dust billowed upward, and within lay a skeleton, draped in remnants of lace. Across her chest, resting upon delicate bones, was a sword, silver. Its hilt was simple, but its blade shimmered faintly, etched with runes older than the keep itself. Along the fuller, words were inscribed in elder speech. Geralt traced them with a gloved hand. Let the oath hold, though the heart fails. He exhaled slowly. Vesemir had taught those words once, an ancient creed of the Witchers, spoken when taking their blades from Kaer Morhen's forge. How this blade had come into the hands of a noblewoman was a question for another day. He reached for the sword. The moment he lifted it, the air in the chapel turned to ice. The white bride appeared beside him, her face twisted between anguish and fury. He swore upon that blade, she cried, her voice echoing from the walls. He broke it. His soul is damned, and so am I. Geralt steadied his grip on the weapon. Then I'll finish his oath. You cannot. Watch me. The Witcher drew the silver sword fully from the grave. The runes along its length flared to life, casting pale light across the chapel. The ghost recoiled, her wail splitting the air like thunder. Outside, the wind screamed through the ruins. Geralt raised the sword high. By the words of Kaer Morhen, by the oath that binds steel to soul, I claim this vow, and I end it. The blade struck the ground, sparks leaping where it met stone. The light exploded outward, flooding the chapel with radiance. When it faded, the wraith was gone. Only silence remained. Geralt stood breathing hard, the silver sword gleaming faintly in his hands. Its weight felt strange, heavy with memory, heavy with promise. He turned toward the doorway, but from beyond came the echo of footsteps, not spectral, real. A voice followed, rough and accented with the southern drawl of Nilfgaard. Put down the sword, Witcher. It doesn't belong to you. Geralt looked up, his eyes narrowing as a figure stepped from the shadows. Armored, dark-haired, a bounty hunter by the look of him, his black cloak trimmed with gold.
I've been following your trail, the man said, smiling thinly. That sword has history, and orders are to bring it south. Geralt sighed. Orders? The bounty hunter drew his blade. Aye. The Empire pays well for relics of power. The Witcher's medallion pulsed once, a warning. Geralt turned the silver blade in his hand. You should have waited until morning. The man grinned. I like the night. Then steel flashed in the moonlight, and the fight for the Oath of Tyne began. The Nilfgaardian bounty hunter moved first, darting forward with a practiced soldier's stride. His blade cut a silver arc through the moonlight, aimed straight for Geralt's ribs. The Witcher turned aside, his motion fluid as water. Steel met silver in a clash that rang through the chapel like a tolling bell. Sparks flew, hissing against the cold flagstones. Geralt's instincts took over, years of drills, of near-death fights in darker places than this. He deflected the next blow, sidestepped, and sent a counter-strike toward the man's unguarded side. The bounty hunter twisted away, fast, too fast for a mere mercenary. His armor was light, made for movement, and he carried himself like a duelist. Nilfgaardian army? Geralt asked between blows. Used to be, the man grunted, parrying another strike. Now I work for myself, but the coin still smells of the sun. Their swords met again, and the impact sent a shiver through Geralt's arms. The Witcher's medallion pulsed once more, steady, insistent. Magic was near. The bounty hunter must have sensed it too, for he stepped back, his lips curling into a grin. You took something cursed, Witcher. You should have left it in the grave. Geralt didn't answer. He had already noticed what the man meant. Faint wisps of frost curling from the hilt of the silver sword. Threads of mist that glimmered with the bride's lingering essence. The curse was not broken. It had only shifted its hold. Drop it, the bounty hunter said. You'll live longer. Doubt it, Geralt replied and lunged. The man barely parried in time. The Witcher's blow knocked him backward against a broken pew. Geralt pressed the advantage. Feints, slashes, swift as lightning. The bounty hunter ducked under one strike, rolled, and came up near the altar. He snatched something from his belt, a small vial, and hurled it at Geralt's feet. The glass shattered, releasing a cloud of shimmering dust. Dimeritium. Geralt swore under his breath. His medallion went dead, his signs useless. The man grinned. Let's make it fair. The next exchange was brutal. Without signs, Geralt relied purely on skill. The bounty hunter fought with precision. Each move measured, each strike meant to kill. They circled the chapel, blades ringing, shadows sliding along the ruined walls. At last, Geralt feinted high, then cut low, sweeping the man's legs from under him. The bounty hunter hit the ground hard, his sword skittering away across the stone. Geralt stepped forward, silver point aimed at the man's throat. Stay down, he warned. The Nilfgaardian only smiled. Blood on his lips. You think you've won, Witcher? From somewhere outside, the air shifted. The temperature dropped sharply, the light dimming as if the moon itself had hidden its face. The mist thickened at the doorway. Geralt knew that presence. The white bride had returned. Her shape coalesced in the entrance of the chapel, pale and luminous. But this time her gaze was not on Geralt. It was fixed on the fallen bounty hunter. You carry the blood of the one who betrayed me, she whispered. Her voice filled the chapel, a sound that was neither living nor dead. You bear his crest. The man's face went white. No, that's not possible. You wear his sword. The wraith hissed, her voice rising. His bloodline carries the stain of his sin. The bounty hunter scrambled back, terror in his eyes. Geralt's blade stayed steady, but his mind raced, a descendant of the treacherous night. That explained the bride's fury, the curse's persistence. The wraith lifted her arms and the air howled. Frost spread across the walls, crawling like vines. The bounty hunter's breath turned to mist as he gasped. Geralt, he shouted, do something. Too late, the Witcher muttered. He leapt forward, slashing through the spectral haze. The silver blade cut through the air, slicing a path of light. The wraith shrieked, but her form did not disperse. Instead, her fury turned upon him. You took his oath, she screamed. You carry his promise. You cannot break it. You must fulfill it. Geralt raised the sword defensively as her energy surged, striking like lightning. Pain lanced through his arm. The sword pulsed, runes blazing. The curse was binding itself to him now.
He gritted his teeth. Fine, then let's finish this properly. The Witcher slammed the sword into the ground once more. Sparks burst from the runes, light flooding the chapel. By the words of the oath, I speak truth, he shouted. Your vengeance is done, Lady Irina. The line of betrayal ends here. The light flared so bright it blinded him. The wraith's scream rose to a deafening pitch and then stopped. When Geralt opened his eyes, the chapel was silent again. The mist was gone. The bride's presence had vanished. The frost began to melt from the stones. The bounty hunter lay sprawled on the ground, breathing shallowly, eyes wide in shock. He looked up at Geralt. You ended it? Geralt shook his head. No, she ended herself. The oaths fulfilled. He sheathed the silver sword, the blade now dim and cold once more, and crouched beside the fallen man. You'll live, he said, but you should go. Don't come back. The Nilfgaardian laughed weakly. You witchers, always so merciful, only when it's earned. Geralt stood and turned toward the ruined doorway. The dawn was breaking, pale gold light spilling across the land, banishing the last of the night's shadows. Outside Roach waited, stamping impatiently near the old well. Geralt mounted, casting one last glance back at the chapel. The tomb of Lady Irina stood open, her remains undisturbed. The air around it felt lighter, freed. He looked at the sword strapped across his back. The runes along the blade were faint, but one glimmered still, the word oath. Witcher's work was rarely clean, rarely simple. This time, though, there was peace. He nudged Roach forward, guiding her along the road leading away from Duntine. Behind him, the sun climbed slowly, its warmth driving away the mist. As he rode, the Witcher whispered under his breath, repeating words he had not spoken since Kaer Morhen. Steel is sworn to the hand, and the hand to the heart. Let the oath hold, though the heart fails. The words hung in the air like prayer. Somewhere far off, a crow called, and the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint, familiar whisper, one of gratitude fading with the morning. Geralt did not look back. He never did. The ruins of Duntine sank behind him, swallowed by the distance and the light, but in his heart he knew one truth remained. Even the dead remember their promises, and a Witcher keeps them, always. The road wound north through fields long abandoned to thistle and wind. The smoke of war had passed, but the land still bore its scars. Villages half burned, orchards stripped, bones whitening in the furrows where crops once grew. Geralt rode in silence. The new sword, the cursed relic from Duntine, lay sheathed across his back beside his own. It weighed heavier than steel should, as if the spirit of the woman it had freed lingered in its metal. He had left the Nilfgaardian where he lay, half conscious but breathing. Whether the man found his way back to his empire or perished on the road was no concern of his. Geralt had done what he came for. The curse was lifted. The dead were quiet again. Still, something in the Witcher's chest felt unsettled, a tug that would not let him rest. The inscription haunted his thoughts. Let the oath hold, though the heart fails. He had heard those words once in the echoing halls of Kaer Morhen when Vesemir had first handed him his blades. They were not meant for nobles or lovers, but for men forged in duty. That sword, buried with Lady Irina, should never have left the Witcher's keep. Strange paths swords take, he muttered to Roach, who flicked her ears as though to agree. The sun climbed higher. By noon, the Witcher reached a fork in the road where a weathered signpost leaned drunkenly in the weeds. One arrow pointed east toward Vizima, another west to Maribor. Between them was a third, the letters almost rubbed away by time. Kagan Vale. Geralt reined in. Kagan Vale was a small settlement by the river where old Kedweni relics were once traded. If he was right, there was a sage there, a scholar of enchantments, who owed him a favor. Perhaps that man could explain why a witcher's oath sword had found its way into a noble woman's grave. He turned Roach west. By dusk, the sky had turned the color of dying embers. The forest thickened, the trees pressing close around the trail. The witcher's medallion began to vibrate, a low, steady pulse. Something stirred in the undergrowth, faint but present. Geralt slowed his horse. "Easy," he murmured, slipping from the saddle. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. A whisper rustled through the leaves. He caught the gleam of eyes between the trees, low to the ground, shining yellow-green. A pack. Wolves, or something close enough. He crouched, drawing his steel blade, not the silver one. The beasts emerged one by one, thin and ragged, ribs showing through fur matted with mud, yet their movements were wrong, too deliberate, too inhuman. Their eyes glowed with faint, sickly light. "Cursed again," Geralt sighed. He whispered the sign of Igni. Flame leapt from his fingers, brief and bright, scattering the nearest of them. But they came on, snarling. The witcher swung the steel blade in a wide arc. The first creature fell with a yelp, cleaved clean. The others circled, darting in and out of reach. A voice broke through the growls, sharp and feminine. "Don't kill them," Geralt spun. From the trees to his right, a figure appeared, bow in hand, hair red as rowan leaves. "Milva," he said, recognizing her instantly. The archer lowered her bow and approached, frowning at the twitching corpses. "Geralt of Rivia, you've a gift for finding trouble. I leave you for a few days, and you're already cutting your way through cursed beasts again." "Didn't plan it," he replied dryly, cleaning the blade. "They started it." She knelt beside one of the fallen animals, touching its fur. Her brow furrowed. "Not wolves. Look here, their ears, their claws. These were men once." Geralt nodded. "Lycanthropy, but it's strange. The curse feels half-formed, unstable." Milva looked up at him. "Meaning?" "Meaning something's interfering with it. Magic, old and messy." She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "Well, you're in luck. I was heading to Kagan Vale myself. Rumors of a plague, maybe a sorcerer's doing. Seems our paths cross again." Geralt sheathed his sword. "Then we ride together." They reached the vale by nightfall. The village lay low in the hollow of the hills, its river swollen from early thaw. Lanterns glowed faintly in the mist, yet there was something wrong in the air. The silence of a place that had forgotten laughter. The few people they passed stared at them from shuttered doorways, faces pale, eyes hollow. They stopped at an inn, the sign above its door half-hanging, letters faded. The Weeping Pike. Inside, the common room was empty save for the innkeeper, a broad-shouldered man who eyed Geralt's swords with open suspicion. "We don't take soldiers," he said. "Not soldiers," Geralt replied. "Witcher, looking for someone. A sage named Darren, used to live near the riverbank." The innkeeper's face tightened. "Darren's dead. River took him last spring. Some say it was no accident." Geralt's eyes narrowed. "And others?" "Others say something pulled him in." Milva glanced at the Witcher. "Charming place." They took a room upstairs. Geralt laid both swords across the table, the lamplight dancing across the runes. The new one, the sword of Duntine, gleamed faintly, though he had not polished it. Milva watched him study it. That the trouble? Always is, he murmured. He told her briefly of the White Bride, the curse, the oath upon the silver sword. Milva listened, her face unreadable. And now you think it's still cursed? She asked. Curses don't die easy, Geralt said, especially ones bound by oaths. Milva leaned back in her chair. So what's the plan? Find who last forged or carried it. Someone who knew its nature. If Darren's gone, maybe his records remain. A sound interrupted them, a soft scrape at the window. Both turned sharply. Milva drew an arrow. Geralt's hand went to his sword. Outside, something moved in the mist, a pale figure standing motionless beyond the glass. Not ghostly, not quite human either. Its eyes were black as pitch, reflecting no light. Geralt rose slowly. Stay back. The figure tilted its head and the window fogged over from its breath, though the air outside was cold. Then with a sound like a whispering sigh, it vanished. Milva exhaled. Well, that's new. Geralt looked at the sword on the table. Its runes were glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Not new, he said grimly. It's following the blade. He strapped both swords to his back and went to the door. Get some rest if you can. I'll check the riverbank. Milva caught his arm. You sure? Never, Geralt said, and stepped into the night. The fog had thickened, rolling and heavy from the river. He followed the path to where the water curved beneath a crumbling bridge. The reeds whispered softly, though there was no wind. Something shimmered on the surface, a reflection that did not match the sky. Geralt knelt, peering closer. Beneath the water, faint and distant, he saw a shape. A man's face, eyes open, lips moving soundlessly. Darren. The Witcher reached into the current, and the river seized him. Water closed over his head, the cold bit like knives. Through the rush of the current, a voice echoed, deep, commanding, old. You carry the blade of Kaer Morhen. Return it or be claimed by its promise. Geralt struggled against the pull, forcing himself upward. The silver sword at his back vibrated violently, its runes burning with light. He broke the surface, gasping. The river went still, calm as glass, but the voice lingered in his mind, whispering like a memory he could not shake. He climbed the bank, dripping and breathless. The sword's glow faded slowly, leaving only the faint shimmer of moonlight on steel. Whatever lay bound within the metal was not done with him yet. And in the distance, across the misted hills, something howled. Neither beast nor man, but something between. Geralt wiped the water from his eyes and muttered to himself, So much for peace. He turned back toward the village lights, knowing sleep would not find him that night, nor any soon after. The night clung to Kagan Vale like a wet cloak. The river whispered behind the inn, its voice dark and secretive, and a faint mist crawled through the streets, coiling about doorsteps and shuttered windows. Geralt moved through it like a shadow. His clothes were still damp from the struggle in the river, but the cold did not touch him. Witchers were made for nights such as this. The memory of that voice beneath the water gnawed at his thoughts. Return the blade or be claimed by its promise. Old magic, deep magic, older even than the wars of men. He had heard its tone once before, in the ruins of Kaer Seren, where the stones themselves whispered of oaths never broken. But this was stronger. It called not to his mind, but to the very blood that carried the mutations of his kind. When he reached the inn again, Milva was waiting at the doorway, bow in hand. You look like death, she said quietly. Geralt's mouth twitched in something almost like a smile. Met a ghost in the river, dead sage by the look of him. didn't take kindly to questions. She lowered the bow slightly. And the sword? Still humming, he replied, glancing at the weapon on his back. The runes glimmered faintly beneath the sheath, as if the metal were restless. Whatever's bound to it isn't done with me yet. Milva frowned. Maybe it's time you got rid of it. Geralt shook his head. I tried leaving it in the chapel. It followed. The curse is tied to the bearer now. Lovely, she muttered. Then we find someone who can unbind it. There might be one left who can, he said. If the sage is truly dead, perhaps his apprentice still lives. Darren was known to take students. We'll ask at first light. They slept little that night. The inn creaked with every gust of wind, and somewhere in the distance, dogs barked without pause. Geralt sat by the window until dawn, sharpening his steel blade, watching the horizon bleed from black to gray to the pallid light of morning. When the sun rose, he and Milva made for the northern edge of the village, where an old tower leaned precariously over the river. The place stank of rot and wet moss. Books lay scattered through the weeds, their pages half dissolved by rain. Inside, the air was thick with mildew. Shelves had collapsed, their contents spilling across the floor, scrolls, vials, broken crystal. Yet among the ruin, Geralt found something untouched, a chest sealed with wax and marked with a sigil he recognized. Kaer Morhen's wolf, Milva murmured, tracing the mark. Geralt nodded. The sage knew witchers. Maybe more than he should have. He pried open the chest. Inside lay papers bound in string, a few glass jars containing dried herbs, and at the very bottom, a medallion shaped like a sunburst, blackened by age. He lifted it carefully. The back bore an inscription in elder speech, "For those who swore by silver." Milva raised a brow. That mean anything? Geralt turned the medallion over in his palm. Enough to make my stomach turn. It's part of the same order as the sword's oath. As he spoke, a shadow passed across the tower's threshold. Both turned sharply. A woman stood there, tall, cloaked, her face half hidden by a hood. I wouldn't touch that witcher, she said softly. Geralt's hand moved toward his sword. Depends who's asking. The woman stepped into the light. She was young, though her eyes told a different story, gray and weary, the kind that had seen too much. I am Lysen, she said, apprentice of Darren the Sage. You came too late to save him, but perhaps not too late to understand what you carry. Milva lowered her bow slightly, though her gaze stayed wary. You knew about the curse? I helped create it, Lysen said quietly. Geralt's eyes narrowed. Explain. She gestured toward the chest. The sword from Duntine was forged with witcher's steel, taken from Kaer Morhen long ago, in the days when your kind still meddled in oaths and protection spells. Darren and I were tasked with binding an oath of loyalty upon it, a ward against betrayal, but the Lord who commissioned it broke that vow before it was ever spoken. The curse twisted on itself. The sword became an anchor for both vow and vengeance. And the bride? Geralt asked. Lysen's eyes lowered. Lady Irina took the blade in secret on her wedding day, swearing her own oath upon it, to love and to trust. When she died, both vows collided. The result was what you saw. Milva crossed her arms. So now it's his problem. The sorceress met Geralt's gaze. Now the sword has found its rightful bearer. The oath of silver binds itself to those who honor their word above their life. That's why it followed you. Geralt's voice hardened. I don't want it. You may not have a choice, Lysen replied. Once awakened, the oath must be fulfilled. It will draw you toward what remains unbalanced in its promise. Until then, it will haunt you. Milva glanced at him. And what happens when it's fulfilled? Then, the sorceress said softly, the sword will choose where to rest. Perhaps with its master, perhaps in his grave. The Witcher sighed, rubbing a hand through his damp hair. You said it must be fulfilled? How? Lysen turned toward the window. Beyond it, the river glimmered under weak sunlight. The one who betrayed the oath has long been dead, but his line endures. Nilfgaard has his blood now, his descendants wear his crest. The Empire seeks the blade because it carries more than a curse. It carries right. Whoever wields it can command the loyalty of those bound by the ancient oaths of Kaer Morhen. Geralt stiffened. Witcher oaths? She nodded. A relic of your order's oldest pacts, forgotten by most. That's why the Empire hunts it, and that's why you must not let them take it. Milva exhaled. So much for a quiet errand. Geralt fastened the medallion's chain around his wrist. You said it draws me to what's unbalanced. What's next? Lysen studied him. Follow the river south. You'll find ruins there, a keep built upon the bones of older stone. Within, something waits that the sword remembers. Before he could ask more, the tower shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling. Lysen's head snapped up. They've found us. Outside, the sound of hooves and armor filled the air. Through the broken windows, Geralt saw black-clad soldiers moving through the mist. Nilfgaardians, a dozen at least. Milva, he said calmly. She was already knocking an arrow. Geralt drew the silver sword. The runes flared to life, pale fire crawling up the blade. The first of the soldiers burst through the doorway, shouting. Geralt met him head-on. The room exploded into motion, steel ringing, arrows whistling, shouts echoing in the confined space. The Witcher moved like a storm, every strike deliberate, efficient. Milva's arrows found their marks with grim precision. Lysen raised her hands, weaving sigils in the air. Blue fire leapt from her palms, scattering the soldiers in bursts of light. When the last of them fell, silence returned, broken only by the hiss of dying embers. Lysen leaned heavily against the wall, her face pale. They'll send more. You must go. Take the sword south. End what began with it. Geralt sheathed the blade. And you? I'll stay. Destroy what remains here. They can't follow if the records burn. Milva touched the woman's arm. You'll die. The sorceress smiled faintly. Better that than let the Empire have what it seeks. Geralt nodded once. Then we go. They rode hard, leaving Kagan Vale behind as smoke rose over the trees. The river ran beside them, dark and swift, whispering as it flowed. The Witcher glanced down at the blade at his side. Its runes pulsed softly, almost like a heartbeat. In the fading light, he thought he heard again the faint echo of that voice from the depths. Return the blade or be claimed by its promise. Geralt urged Roach faster. He had no intention of surrendering to either. The oath was his now, and whether it led to redemption or ruin, he would see it through to its bitter end. The sun was a dull red ember sinking behind the hills. When Geralt and Milva reached the southern road, the day's light bled through the mist, turning the fields to bronze and shadow. They had ridden for hours without rest, following the river's winding course as it cut through the heart of Temeria. The world seemed hushed, waiting, as if the very air held its breath. Geralt slowed Roach to a trot. His eyes moved constantly, reading the signs of the land the way a scholar reads parchment. The river ran low here, revealing black stones marked with carvings long faded. The Witcher recognized the patterns, sigils of warding, centuries old. They marked a boundary, a warning to those who still remembered what once slept beneath. Milva rode beside him, her red hair hidden beneath a hood against the chill. "How much farther, you think?" "Not far," he replied. Lysen said the ruins stood on the river's south bend. There's something here the sword remembers. Best we find it before the Nilfgaardians do. Milva snorted softly. "You make it sound like the damn thing's alive." Geralt gave a small, humorless smile. "In a way, it is." The path narrowed between two slopes of rock. Here, the air grew colder still, and the Witcher's medallion began to hum faintly. He dismounted, signaling for Milva to do the same. "We walk from here." They led their horses along the edge of the water, their boots crunching on the stones. A fog was gathering again, rising from the river like breath. Through it, Geralt caught the faint outline of a keep half swallowed by the earth, a ruin of tumbled walls and fallen towers built of black stone that glimmered faintly in the fading light. "That's it," he said. Milva glanced around uneasily. "Looks abandoned." "It is. But something sleeps there still." They entered through a gate choked with ivy. The courtyard beyond was a graveyard of shattered pillars and rusted armor, the remnants of a fortress that had seen too many sieges. Birds wheeled above, their cries thin and distant. Geralt's eyes swept the stones, noting where the mortar had crumbled and where the moss refused to grow. The magic here was old, older than Kaer Morhen, older than the wars that broke the continent. Milva drew an arrow and notched it, her instincts sharp. "I don't like this." "Neither do I," Geralt murmured. He moved toward the central tower, where the doorway stood half open. Inside, the air was thick and stale, carrying the scent of metal and decay. Cobwebs hung like curtains, and somewhere deeper within, he heard the faint drip of water. The silver sword at his back began to thrum, a low, steady vibration that traveled through the hilt and into his bones. The runes along its length flared, faint at first, then brighter. "It's reacting," Milva said. "I know," Geralt answered quietly. "Whatever binds to it is close." He drew the blade. The light from the runes painted the walls with pale reflections. Deeper and deeper they went, down a stair carved from a single block of stone. The air grew colder with each step until they reached the bottom, a vast chamber lit by no torch, yet faintly aglow with the eerie luminescence of glyphs carved into the floor. At its center lay a great slab of metal, half buried in the earth. It was shaped like a door, but there were no hinges, no handles, only symbols etched into its surface, the same ancient script that wound along Geralt's new sword. He knelt beside it, tracing the marks with his gloved hand. "This isn't just a ruin," he said. "It's a seal." Milva peered over his shoulder. "A seal for what?" Geralt didn't answer immediately. His medallion trembled, and a cold wind rose from nowhere. "Something Kaer Morhen buried long ago," he said at last. "Something tied to our first oaths. They sealed away what they couldn't control." He stood, tightening his grip on the sword, and now the sword wants it unsealed. Milva's eyes narrowed. "You sure that's wise?" "Not in the least," he replied and raised the blade. The runes pulsed, answering the glyphs in the floor. A sound like grinding stone filled the chamber. The slab began to tremble, splitting along ancient seams. "Geralt!" Milva shouted. Too late. The seal broke. A surge of air blasted outward, flinging dust and debris across the room. The light from the sword flared white hot. And from the fissure beneath the slab came a voice, not a scream, not a whisper, but something vast, cold, and commanding. "The oath endures." Geralt staggered back, his sword blazing in his hand. From the rift rose a figure, tall, armored, faceless. Its body was wrought of shadow and iron, and in its chest burned the same pale light as the runes upon the Witcher's blade. Milva took a step back. "What in the gods' names is that?" "The Warden," Geralt said grimly, "an oathkeeper of Kaer Morhen, a guardian forged to punish oath breakers." The creature turned its head toward him. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "You bear the blade of the oath. Why have you called me forth?" Geralt met its gaze without flinching. "Because the vow you guard has twisted into a curse. It's killing the innocent." "Then break the blade." "I can't," Geralt said. "The sword won't let itself be destroyed." The Warden's eyes, if eyes they could be called, flared brighter. "Then fulfill its promise, Witcher. The oath is not broken until the betrayer's line ends. The sword will know when its purpose is complete." Geralt tightened his grip on the hilt. "The line still lives in Nilfgaard." "Then you know your path," the words echoed, reverberating through the chamber. The Warden's form began to fade, its outline dissolving into smoke. "Do not fail, child of Kaer Morhen. If you do, the oath will claim you, as it claimed him." Then it was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Milva was the first to move, lowering her bow slowly. "That thing expects you to kill an entire bloodline?" Geralt sheathed the sword. "No, just the one who carries the guilt." "And who's that?" He didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the sword. The runes had dimmed again, but one word burned faintly brighter than the rest. "South." "The Empire," he murmured. "It wants me to go to Nilfgaard." Milva shook her head. "Geralt, that's suicide. The roads are watched. They'll hang you before you get near the capital." He looked at her, his expression calm and resolute. "I've had worse odds." She sighed. "Then I'm coming with you." "You shouldn't." She smirked faintly. "I know. That's why I will." For a moment, the Witcher said nothing. Then, with a low grunt that might have been approval, he turned toward the stairs. "We'll rest till dawn, then we ride south." Outside, the first stars had begun to pierce the evening sky. The river whispered beside the ruins, carrying with it the faint echo of the Warden's words. The oath was awake now, and it would not sleep again. Geralt stared at the horizon where the south lay, a land of black banners and gold suns, and felt the pull of fate tightening around him like a noose. He mounted Roach, feeling the weight of both blades at his back. "Come on, girl," he murmured. "We've work yet to do." As the Witcher and the Archer rode into the gathering dark, the ruins of the keep fell silent once more. Only the wind remained, sighing through the stones, like the memory of an ancient vow. Far below, beneath the sealed chamber, the faint glow of the rift still flickered, waiting, watching, for the oath to be fulfilled. The road south wound like a scar through the borderlands, an endless ribbon of mud and ash that clung to the hooves of Roach and Milva's horse alike. The air carried the scent of smoke and iron, for armies had passed here not long ago. Burned wagons and shattered helms lay half buried in the fields, blackened relics of battles long finished yet never truly ended. Geralt rode in silence, his cloak heavy with dust, his eyes scanning the horizon where the dark line of Nilfgaard's frontier loomed. Beyond it stretched the Empire, vast, ordered, and merciless, a place where witchers were distrusted, and oaths were little more than words twisted to serve ambition. Yet the sword upon his back pulsed faintly, guiding him onward like a heartbeat he could not ignore. Milva broke the silence first. "Tell me something," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut through the heavy air.
If that thing, the warden, told you to end the bloodline of the traitor, what happens if you refuse? Geralt didn't answer at once. He kept his gaze on the road. Then the oath takes me instead. That's the law of old magic. A vow once invoked cannot be left unfulfilled. Milva frowned. Meaning? Meaning I die, he said flatly, and not quickly. She muttered something under her breath about witchers and their cursed luck, but Geralt said nothing more. He had seen too many lives twisted by promises that outlasted their makers. This sword, this burden, it was merely another chain forged by human folly, and yet he could not cast it aside. By midday they reached a small way station near the crossroads. The tavern there had seen better years. Its roof sagged, its windows were patched with waxed parchment instead of glass. Still a fire burned inside, and the smell of broth drifted out, thin but warm. They dismounted, tethering the horses near the trough. The tavern keeper, a stout woman with sleeves rolled up to her elbows, looked them over warily. "You'll find no beds here," she said, "only soup and silence." "Soup will do," Geralt replied. They sat near the hearth, eating in quiet. The firelight glinted off the witcher's medallion, catching the attention of a man seated at the far table. A traitor by the look of him, gray-bearded and thin. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You're heading south," the traitor said, voice low. "Toward Nilfgaard?" Geralt nodded. "Then you'd best turn back," the man said. "The Black Ones hold every bridge now. No one crosses without a writ, and they've orders to kill any witcher who dares." Milva's eyes flicked to Geralt. "Sounds welcoming." The traitor lowered his voice further. "There's talk in the camps. An officer of the Empire searching for something. A relic forged in the north, older than the wars. They say it grants power over the will of men." Geralt's hand paused over his bowl. "A sword?" The traitor shrugged. "Maybe. They say its bearer can command loyalty, bend men to their oaths. A cursed thing, if you ask me." Geralt exchanged a glance with Milva. The oath was not only calling him south, it was being hunted too. After paying for their meal, they stepped outside, into the dimming afternoon. The wind carried with it the distant sound of marching boots, Nilfgaardian patrols, no doubt. Geralt tightened the straps on Roach's saddle. "We move now," he said. "They're close." They rode until nightfall, keeping to the tree line. The forest deepened, swallowing the last light. Somewhere ahead, wolves howled, and the horses snorted uneasily. But it wasn't wolves that made Geralt's medallion tremble. It was magic again, faint but familiar, woven into the very air. They came to a glade where moonlight poured through the branches like silver water. In its center stood a shrine, ancient, overgrown, half buried beneath roots. A stone figure lay crumbling there, its face worn away, its hands clutching a shattered sword. Geralt dismounted. "Kaer Morhenkraft," he murmured. "Old, very old." Milva crouched beside the statue. "Looks like it's been here for centuries." The witcher knelt,
brushing away moss. Beneath the grime he uncovered faint runes carved into the base, identical to those on his cursed blade. He whispered the words aloud. "The oath holds." The sword on his back answered. The runes flared with sudden light, bathing the glade in ghostly silver. The ground shuddered. "Geralt!" Milva shouted. He barely had time to react before the earth split open. From the fissure rose not a spirit this time, but a memory, a vision painted in light and shadow. Figures took shape. Witchers clad in armor older than his own, standing before the same shrine, blades drawn, faces grim. Their leader spoke words Geralt somehow understood, though the tongue was lost to time. "We bind the oath here, that the honor of the wolf endure when the hearts of men fail. Let none bear the silver untested." Then the vision shifted. The same witchers lay dead, their swords scattered, their oaths betrayed. The last of them, eyes bright with pain, drove his blade into the earth and spoke once more. "Let the oath find one worthy." The light faded. The ground sealed again, leaving only silence. Milva stared at him. "What was that?" "History," Geralt said quietly. "The kind no one bothers to remember." He rose, gripping the sword. "It's calling me to Nilfgaard, but not for vengeance. The oath wants something restored. Balance, maybe. A promise undone." Milva studied him a long moment. "Then we keep going." They rode through the night. The moon sank behind the trees, and dawn crept pale across the horizon. At last, the forest thinned, giving way to rolling fields. And far beyond, the black banners of Nilfgaard fluttered like wings against the morning sky. They stopped at the crest of a hill. Below them stretched the border, a broad river crossed by a single bridge of iron, guarded by towers and rows of soldiers in gilded mail. Milva whistled softly. "We're not crossing that by charm and smile alone." Geralt scanned the defenses. "There's another way. South of here, the river splits into marshland. Dangerous, but less watched." Milva gave him a sidelong glance. "Dangerous how?" He almost smiled. "You'll see." They turned their horses and rode along the ridge, the rising sun burning gold through the mist. Behind them, the ruined shrine stood silent again, but if one listened closely, the wind carried faint whispers from its stones, words in the old tongue, spoken softly like a prayer. "Let the oath hold, though the heart fails." By the time night fell once more, Geralt and Milva had reached the edge of the marshes. The air smelled of salt and decay, the water black as ink beneath the reeds. Fireflies glimmered over stagnant pools, their lights dancing like lost souls. Geralt dismounted and tested the ground with his boot. "We cross here. Stay close." Milva grimaced. "You've a talent for fine vacation spots, Witcher." He gave her a brief glance. "You'll thank me later." As they waded into the mire, the sword's runes began to glow again, faint and cold, casting pale reflections across the water. Beneath the surface, shapes moved, slow, deliberate, ancient. Geralt drew his silver blade, the cursed one humming softly. "Something's watching." Milva knocked an arrow, then let it watch from the afterlife. From the darkness came a ripple, a sound like breath drawn through water, then another, and then, with a hiss that froze the air, the surface broke, and the marsh itself came alive. Dozens of shapes rose from the muck, half human, half drowned, their eyes burning green in the gloom. Drowners, but larger, their limbs too long, their mouths full of black teeth. Geralt set his stance. "Stay behind me." The first of them lunged. Silver met flesh, and the night erupted in a storm of light and blood. The oath was far from over. The marsh erupted into chaos. The water churned as the drowners surged forward, their slick, gray bodies slapping through the muck. Their eyes burned with sickly green fire, and their voices were a chorus of shrieks and hissing gurgles that shattered the stillness of the night. Geralt's sword flashed silver in the gloom, each swing leaving arcs of pale light as he cut through the swarm. The cursed blade thrummed with unnatural energy, its runes pulsing brighter with every strike, as if the steel itself drank in the death around it. The Witcher moved like a creature of instinct and precision, his motions a deadly rhythm honed by years of battle. He ducked beneath a lunging claw, spun, and drove the point of the sword through another drowner's chest. The monster convulsed, dissolved into sludge, and sank beneath the black water. "Geralt!" Milva shouted from behind him. He turned in time to see a drowner lurching toward her from the reeds. She loosed an arrow, the shaft striking true through its throat. It staggered but did not fall. Another arrow followed, then another, until the creature collapsed into the mud with a wet thud. "More on the right," she called. "I see them." Geralt drew a sign with his free hand, the shape of Igni flaring across his palm. Fire erupted in a wide arc, setting the marsh alight. The flames danced upon the water's surface, burning despite the dampness, casting grotesque shadows that writhed along the trees. The drowners screamed and scattered, their slick skin cracking under the heat. For a moment there was silence. Only the hiss of fire and the low murmur of the river remained. Then, from the far side of the marsh, a deeper sound rose, a guttural bellow that made the reeds tremble. Geralt tensed. "That's no drowner!" Milva cursed under her breath. "What now?" The water heaved, rising in a wave. From its depths emerged something enormous, a creature half drowned, half born of the marsh itself. It stood taller than a man, its body woven of mud, bone, and root. Its eyes were hollow pits filled with pale green light, and its voice was the grinding of stone and water. Geralt's medallion vibrated violently against his chest. "A drown lord," he muttered. "Haven't seen one in years." "What's the plan?" Milva asked, already drawing another arrow. "Keep its attention off me," he said, stepping forward. "And don't miss." The creature bellowed again and charged, the ground quaking under its steps. Geralt met it head-on, ducking beneath a massive swing of its arm. The impact tore through the mud where he'd stood a heartbeat earlier. He slashed across its side, the silver blade biting deep. Black ichor spilled out, steaming where it touched the air. Milva's arrows sang through the night. One struck the creature's shoulder, another buried in its throat. The drown lord howled and turned toward her, its steps heavy and slow, but relentless. Geralt lunged, plunging his sword into its back. The cursed steel blazed, runes igniting with white light. The creature convulsed and let out a roar that shook the marsh. A voice echoed within Geralt's mind, cold, ancient, the same that had spoken from the river. "The oath holds. The bound must serve." The drown lord froze mid-motion, its glowing eyes flickering. The Witcher's sword pulsed again, light spilling from the runes and crawling across the monster's form like veins of fire. Milva lowered her bow slightly. "Geralt, what's happening?" He didn't answer. The sword vibrated in his hand, pulling, directing. The drown lord dropped to one knee, its massive head bowed. Then, to Milva's astonishment, it spoke, its voice broken, yet unmistakably obedient. "Master of Silver, command me."
Geralt stepped back slowly, disbelief flickering in his cat-like eyes. "You're bound to the oath. All who were made by betrayal are bound," the creature rumbled. "The oath's power commands loyalty, even among the cursed." Milva stared. "You're telling me that thing will obey you?" "For now," Geralt said grimly. "But the oath's power isn't meant for this world. Every time it acts, it draws something closer, something worse." The Drowned Lord lowered its gaze further, waiting. Geralt sheathed the sword with deliberate slowness. "Return to your depths," he said. "Harm no living soul again. The oath demands silence, not servitude." The creature bowed once, the motion heavy and solemn. Then it sank back into the water, leaving only ripples and the faint stench of rot behind. Milva exhaled. "Remind me never to make a promise near you." He gave a tired smirk. "Wise choice." They trudged through the marsh until the ground firmed beneath their boots again. The fire behind them died out, swallowed by mist and shadow. When they reached a rise of dry earth, Geralt stopped and looked back. "The oath doesn't just bind monsters," he said quietly. "It binds everything that's been betrayed, every soul twisted by false vows. The sword draws them to it." Milva shivered despite herself. "Then what happens when we reach Nilfgaard?" Geralt gazed southward. "We find whoever still carries the stain of that betrayal, and we end it." They camped beneath the shelter of an old willow. The night was thick with fog, the stars hidden behind clouds. Geralt sat by the small fire, his silver sword resting across his knees. The runes no longer glowed, but he could still feel the faint pulse within them, like the beating of a buried heart. Milva cleaned her arrows in silence, glancing at him now and then. "You think the sword can be destroyed after all this?" she asked finally. Geralt didn't look up. "Everything can be destroyed. The question is, who pays the price?" She nodded slowly. "You always sound like you've already decided it'll be you." He smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed fixed on the flames. "Someone has to bear the weight. I was made for it." For a while, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly, and the sounds of the marsh seemed far away. Then somewhere in the darkness beyond their camp, a horn blew, a long, low note that carried over the water like a promise of blood. Milva reached for her bow. "Nilfgaardians?" Geralt stood, sheathing the sword. "Or something worse." They doused the fire and mounted their horses, moving toward the faint glow that flickered through the mist. Soon they saw torches, scores of them, marching across the far bank of the river. Soldiers in black armor, their banners marked with the sun of Nilfgaard. At their head rode a tall figure in gilded plate, his helm shaped like the beak of a falcon. Even from a distance, Geralt could feel the pull, the oath recognizing something within that man, the same blood, the same stain. Milva cursed under her breath. "Let me guess, that's our man." Geralt's jaw tightened. The traitor's heir. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of the army's march. The Witcher's hand fell to the hilt of the cursed sword, feeling its cold hum against his palm. The oath was awakening again, and this time it would not rest until its purpose was fulfilled. "Come," Geralt said softly. "Before dawn, we'll know what kind of ghosts the Empire hides." They rode along the ridge, shadows within shadows, as the black tide of soldiers crossed the marsh below. The night swallowed their figures, and only the faint gleam of runes remained, pale silver fire pulsing like a heartbeat in the dark. The dawn rose blood red above the southern horizon, staining the mist like spilled wine.
Geralt and Milva had shadowed the Nilfgaardian column through the night, keeping to the high ridges where the horses' hooves made no sound upon the moss. Below, the army moved like a dark serpent across the marshes, standards of black and gold rippling in the chill wind, armor glinting faintly beneath the fog. The Witcher watched in silence, his eyes narrowed. The cursed blade across his back thrummed faintly, resonating with each measured step of the soldiers. The closer they drew to the heart of the column, the stronger the pull became. Somewhere among those ranks marched the one whose blood had once betrayed an oath of love, of loyalty, of silver and steel. Milva crouched beside him, her bow strung, an arrow ready, though she did not yet draw. "How do we find him?" she whispered. "There must be hundreds." "We won't have to," Geralt replied quietly. "The sword will find him." He shifted his weight, feeling the medallion against his chest tremble. The runes on the blade glowed through the leather of its scabbard, pale, cold light like moonlight on ice. "Stay here," he said. "Not a chance," Milva shot back. "Then stay low." Before she could protest again, he was already descending the slope. The mist swallowed him whole. He moved through it like a phantom, silent as shadow. The soldiers nearest the riverbank had stopped to water their horses, their helmets removed, their expressions weary. None noticed the Witcher slipping between them. His eyes flicked over each face, searching, weighing. Nothing yet. Then he felt it, a surge, a jolt that traveled through the sword like a heartbeat. He turned toward the center of the camp. There, surrounded by officers and guards, rode the man from the night before, the one in the gilded armor, helm shaped like a falcon. Geralt moved closer. The oath's hum grew stronger, rising into a low, vibrating chant that only he could hear. The officer dismounted, removing his helm. His face was angular, proud, the hair black and streaked with silver at the temples. His eyes, dark, intelligent, met Geralt's across the distance, and for a moment, both men stilled. "You," the officer said softly, recognition dawning in his tone. "You're the Witcher from the north." "Geralt of Rivia." The man nodded slowly. "I am Captain Lucian Tyne, commander of the 3rd Nilfgaardian host." He tilted his head, studying the sword on Geralt's back. "And that blade you carry, it belonged to my house once." "It did?" Geralt said evenly. "And the curse that came with it." Lucian's expression did not change, though his jaw tightened. "So the stories are true. The ghost, the oath, the blade that kills for broken vows. They're true," Geralt said, "and it's calling for you." The captain's guard stirred uneasily, but Lucian raised a hand. "Stand down." He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Geralt's. "My ancestors betrayed an oath, yes, but I am no oathbreaker." "The sword disagrees." The captain's voice hardened. "I serve my emperor with honor. I've never broken faith." "Maybe not," Geralt said, drawing the silver blade. "But blood remembers." The moment the steel left its sheath, the air changed. Wind rushed through the camp, though no storm stirred the sky. The runes blazed, reflecting in Lucian's dark eyes. Soldiers drew their weapons, shouting in confusion. "Witcher!" Milva's voice came faintly from the ridge. Too late. The captain's hand went to his own sword. It was an elegant weapon, black steel, etched with gold. "If it's blood the curse demands," he said quietly. "I'll offer my own before it takes yours." Geralt nodded once. "So be it." The first clash of steel was deafening. Sparks burst between their blades, and the shock of impact traveled up Geralt's arms. Lucian fought with the grace of a trained commander.
each strike precise, measured, merciless. The Witcher countered with swift parries, his movements efficient and economical, each motion calculated to exploit weakness. But the sword in Geralt's hand burned hotter with each exchange. It guided him, moved with him, too smoothly, too eagerly. He realized grimly that the blade did not merely want Lucian's blood, it wanted the end of the oath, even if that end meant his death as well. Lucian feinted, striking for Geralt's side. The Witcher twisted aside, steel scraping along his mail. The captain pressed forward, his expression fierce, but beneath the fury was something else. Grief, perhaps, or guilt, long buried. "You think you know what my family did?" Lucian snarled. "They sold their loyalty, yes, but to save lives, to end a war that would have burned all Temeria to the ground. My great-grandfather opened the gates of Duntine not for gold, but to spare his people." Geralt blocked another blow. "And he doomed them anyway," Lucian shouted, a wordless cry, and drove forward. Their swords locked, the strength of both men straining against the other. The cursed runes flared blindingly, and a voice thundered between them, neither of theirs yet born from both. "The oath holds. One must fall." The world seemed to slow. Geralt saw the choice in that heartbeat, the blade urging him to strike, to fulfill the promise written in its steel. But deep within, something resisted. He was a Witcher, not an executioner of fate. He released the lock and stepped back. "Break it," he said. "Break the oath yourself. Admit what was done and end the curse." Lucian hesitated, chest heaving. The soldiers around them stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene. Then the captain lowered his sword. "If confession will buy peace," he said, "then I confess. My line was born from treachery. We prospered on betrayal. If that is our sin, then let me bear it." He dropped to one knee, the gesture solemn, proud even in surrender. "If the oath demands blood, it will have mine." The runes dimmed. The air stilled. Geralt exhaled slowly. For a moment he thought it was over. Then the sword flared once more, blinding white. The earth trembled, and a column of light burst skyward. The soldiers cried out, shielding their eyes. Lucian looked up, confusion on his face. "What?" Before he could finish, the light pierced him through. His body arched, his voice breaking into a cry that was both pain and release. The glow consumed him, then faded, leaving nothing but the faint shimmer of dust carried away by the wind. The sword fell silent. Geralt stood there for a long time, his breath ragged, the world spinning slowly back into focus. Milva appeared beside him, bow in hand, eyes wide. "Is it done?" she asked. He looked down at the blade. Its runes had gone dark, cold, lifeless metal once more. "It's done." The soldiers around them remained still, awe and fear mingling in their faces. None dared move. Geralt sheathed the sword, turned, and began to walk away. Milva followed, silent, until they reached the edge of the camp. "You spared him," she said softly. "I tried," Geralt replied. "The oath didn't." They mounted and rode into the dawn. Behind them, the Nilfgaardian camp remained quiet, the men staring at the place where their captain had vanished. As they crossed the hills, the wind shifted, carrying the faintest whisper, gentle, almost grateful. "Let the oath rest." Geralt looked to the horizon where the sun was rising bright and gold. For the first time in many days, the sword did not hum, but deep within, the Witcher wondered how long peace like this could last. For oaths, like ghosts, never truly died. They merely slept, waiting for the next heart to fail. The road stretched endless beneath a sky of broken clouds, and the wind that rose from the south carried no warmth.
Days had passed since the duel at the Nilfgaardian camp, yet the echo of steel and the flare of the cursed blade still haunted Geralt's thoughts. The sword, once thrumming with its terrible will, now lay silent across his back, its runes dull, as if sleeping. But silence did not always mean peace. He and Milva rode north again, away from the Imperial lines, their pace slow but steady. The war front lay behind them, yet the land bore its wounds still. Villages half empty, burned watchtowers standing like blackened teeth, the stench of rot carried by the wind. Every so often they passed travelers fleeing west, their faces gray with fear, their carts heavy with all that was left of their lives. Milva was the first to speak. "You've been quiet since the fight," she said. "More than usual, I mean." Geralt gave a faint grunt that might have been a reply. His eyes remained on the road ahead. She continued anyway. "He didn't deserve that, the captain. He wasn't the one who betrayed anyone. I know. And yet the sword took him anyway." Geralt's hand brushed the hilt behind his shoulder. "Oaths have their own logic," he said. "They don't see mercy or time, only truth. Somewhere in the weave of the curse, his blood still carried guilt. The sword found it." Milva frowned. "Then what does that make you, Witcher? The sword's keeper or its prisoner?" He did not answer. The question hung between them, heavy as lead. That night they camped by the edge of a forest, where frost silvered the grass, and the trees whispered in the wind. Geralt built a small fire, its flames throwing weak light across the clearing. Milva sat opposite him, fletching arrows, her eyes glancing often toward the sword that lay across his knees. "Do you feel it still?" she asked. He looked down at the blade. "Faintly, like something watching from far away. But it's quiet now." She hesitated. "And if it wakes again?" "Then I'll deal with it," he said simply. Milva shook her head, muttering, "You witchers. You always think you can outstare death." Geralt smiled faintly. "Sometimes we can." They slept in shifts. The forest around them was still, but not lifeless. Small movements in the dark, the rustle of creatures passing unseen. Sometime before dawn, Geralt's eyes opened. His medallion was vibrating, faintly but steady. He sat up, hand on the hilt of his steel sword, scanning the shadows. Nothing moved, yet the feeling of being watched crept over him like frost on glass. Then he heard it, a voice low and distant carried by the wind. "The oath is fulfilled, but not ended." Geralt rose slowly. The cursed sword glimmered faintly in the firelight, its runes flickering once like an eye opening. Milva stirred beside him. "What is it? Nothing good?" The wind shifted again, and from the darkness beyond the trees a figure appeared. It was not ghostly nor wholly human. A tall silhouette wrapped in a cloak that seemed woven from shadow itself. Its face was hidden, but its voice was deep and resonant. "You carry the oath," it said. Geralt did not reach for his weapon yet. "I carried it," he replied. "The curse is broken." "Broken?" The figure tilted its head, a sound like distant laughter echoing through the trees. "No, Witcher. Oaths such as these are never broken. They are passed on." Milva rose, bow in hand. "And what are you supposed to be?" The figure turned toward her, and even from where she stood, she felt its gaze pierce her like cold steel. "Once I was a knight," it said, "a servant of Tyne, bound by the same vow that cursed your companion's blade. When the house fell, my soul was forfeit to the oath's power. Now I am its herald." Geralt's eyes narrowed. "And what does the oath want now?" "The sword's bearer must carry it home," the herald said. to where the oath was first spoken, to Kaer Morhen. The name struck the air like thunder. Geralt's grip tightened on the hilt. Kaer Morhen is no place for curses. It is the cradle of the oath, the shadow replied. Forged by your kind, sworn by your forebears. If you would end its power forever, you must return it there. And if I refuse, then the oath will take another host, and its curse will begin anew. For a long time, Geralt said nothing. The fire crackled softly between them. Finally, he nodded once. So be it. The shadow bowed its head. Then the path will be shown. Beware, Witcher. The oath hungers for those who swear falsely. Along the road, truth will be tested. It faded like smoke, leaving behind only silence and the faint smell of ash. Milva exhaled slowly. I was hoping we were done with all this. So was I, Geralt said. They broke camp before dawn, the forest heavy with fog. The road northward stretched ahead. Long, uncertain, but familiar. As they rode, Geralt felt the pull again, faint but insistent, drawing him toward the mountains where the Witchers made their home. For days they traveled through ruined hamlets and along snow-fed rivers. Word of their passing spread like rumor, whispers of a white-haired rider and his red-haired companion, of a sword that glowed in the dark, and a curse that would not die. On the third night, as they made camp near a crumbling watchtower, Milva finally spoke the thought that had been growing between them. When we reach Kaer Morhen, she said quietly, what then? You'll destroy it? Geralt poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. If I can? And if it destroys you first? He looked across the flames at her. Then it ends with me. That's enough. Milva sighed, leaning back against her pack. You Witchers are hopeless. Maybe, he said, but we keep our word. The night deepened. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled across the plains. Geralt drew the silver sword from its sheath, examining its dull runes in the firelight. For the first time, he thought he saw something different in them. Not just menace, but weariness, as if the weapon itself longed to rest. He spoke softly, more to the sword than to Milva. We're going home. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of snow from the north. When dawn broke, they were already on the move. Ahead lay the blue mountains, their peaks hidden behind a veil of cloud. Somewhere beyond those ridges stood Kaer Morhen, the keep of Witchers, cradle of their order, and now perhaps the final resting place of a curse older than kingdoms. As they rode, Milva glanced at him and smiled faintly. You ever think this will be the last of your adventures, Geralt? He didn't answer right away. The sunlight caught his hair, turning it silver white. No, he said finally, not for the likes of me. And the road went on, winding ever northward, towards snow, steel, and the ghosts that waited in the mountains. Snow fell thick upon the mountain passes, soft and soundless as ash. The air was thin, sharp with frost, and the sky hung low, a gray shroud pressing against the peaks. Geralt urged Roach forward through the drifts, her breath pluming in the cold. Milva rode behind, her cloak drawn tight, her bow slung across her back beneath a crust of ice. They had climbed for days, leaving behind the lowlands and their dying forests, the smoke of war replaced by the whisper of snow. The road had become nothing more than a trail between cliffs. Once, in warmer years, it had been used by merchants and pilgrims heading toward Cadwyn. Now it was abandoned, buried beneath years of neglect and storm. Geralt knew the way by instinct more than memory, for his kind had walked this path countless times before. Students, wanderers, brothers returning to the keep that had shaped them. Milva broke the silence first. "I thought witchers didn't get cold," she said, her voice muffled by her scarf. "We don't," Geralt replied, "not easily." "Then why do you look half dead?" "Because I'm half dead," he said dryly, and she laughed despite herself. They pressed onward. The higher they climbed, the heavier the snow fell, until the world became little more than white and gray. Once or twice wolves followed them along the ridges, their eyes like faint embers in the dark. But they did not attack. Even beasts knew better than to challenge a witcher in his own mountains. At last, as the sun bled into twilight, Geralt saw it. A narrow valley stretching ahead, the wind howling through its mouth. At its heart rose a fortress of black stone, its towers broken, its walls veiled in frost and ivy. Kaer Morhen. Milva drew rein beside him, eyes wide. "So this is where it began," he nodded, "and where it must end." They descended the last slope in silence. The gates of the keep hung open, their hinges groaning in the wind. Snow drifted through the courtyard, covering the training yard and the fallen stones where once young witchers had sparred. Geralt dismounted, his boots crunching upon the frozen ground. He could almost hear the echoes of their laughter, the clang of blades, Vesemir's gruff commands, Eskel's quiet jokes. But those ghosts were long gone. Milva followed, glancing around uneasily. Not exactly welcoming. It never was. They entered the great hall. The fire pits were cold, the benches overturned. A thin film of ice coated the walls. Yet even in ruin, the place held its power. The medallion at Geralt's throat vibrated faintly, reacting to the dormant magic that lingered in every stone. He walked to the center of the hall and unsheathed the silver sword. The runes glimmered faintly, as if awakening to the old air. Milva's voice was hushed. "What now?" Geralt placed the sword upon the flagstones. "Now we see if the oath can die where it was born." He knelt beside it, pressing a hand to the hilt. The metal was cold, too cold, even for him. He closed his eyes and spoke in the elder speech, the words of the Witcher's creed. "By steel and by blood, by oath and by flame, let what was sworn be unbound. Let the chains of the past fall silent." The air stirred. The torches along the walls flickered to life, one by one, though none had been lit. The hall filled with a dim golden glow. The sword's runes flared brighter, burning through frost and shadow. Milva stepped back. "Geralt?" He did not move. His eyes were closed, his lips forming the old words, ones no witcher had spoken aloud in centuries. The light spread across the floor, tracing the outlines of a great symbol carved into the stone, a wolf's head, fanged and proud. From its eyes burst twin streams of fire, meeting at the sword's tip. The blade rose slowly from the ground, suspended in the air, its runes blazing. Then came the voice, deep, ancient, not human. It filled the hall, the very stones trembling beneath its weight. "Child of Kaer Morhen, why summon the oath when its burden is already yours?" Geralt lifted his gaze. "Because it must end. Too many have suffered beneath it." "End? There is no ending to what was forged in truth. You swore to carry the oath until no false vow remained in this world." "I swore nothing. I found it. Found, claimed, born. It is the same. You accepted it when you spoke its words." Geralt rose slowly, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "Then I unswear it. Whatever bond was made, I break it now." The hall shook. The voice thundered like a storm. "To break the oath is to break yourself." "So be it," Geralt said. The sword fell from the air, slamming into the ground point first.
A wave of force burst outward, scattering dust and frost. The Witcher staggered, clutching his chest as pain seared through him. He could feel the curse, ancient, relentless, uncoiling inside his veins like molten metal. Milva ran to him. "Geralt! Stay back!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. The light from the runes crawled up his arm, burning beneath the skin. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to his feet. The voice rose again, cold and furious. "You who would destroy what made you? You are bound by the same forge, the same steel. Without the oath, there are no Witchers." Geralt's breath came in ragged gasps. "Then maybe it's time we end with it." He seized the sword, lifted it high, and drove it down into the stone wolf's eye. A crack split the hall. Fire poured from the wound in the floor, engulfing the sword in blinding light. The oath screamed, an echo that tore through the mountain and faded into the storm. When the light died, Geralt fell to his knees. The sword lay shattered before him, its fragments glowing red before cooling to gray. The runes were gone, only silence remained. Milva knelt beside him, her hands shaking. "You did it," she whispered. He nodded weakly. "It's over." But even as he said it, he knew it was not. The medallion still trembled faintly, not with danger, but with change. The keep itself seemed to breathe again, the walls sighing, the old fires whispering back to life. From the broken sword rose a faint shimmer of light. It hovered for a moment, then drifted upward, passing through the high, cracked roof and into the gray sky. Milva watched it vanish. What was that? Geralt stared after it, eyes distant. The oath! Finally free! They remained there for a time, listening to the quiet. Snow drifted through the holes in the roof, melting upon the warm stones. Geralt rose at last, brushing frost from his cloak. "Come," he said softly. "We'll rest a while. Then we leave this place to its ghosts." As they stepped from the hall, the wind outside carried a sound like distant laughter, soft, almost kind. Geralt paused, glancing back at the keep. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw a figure standing in the doorway, an old man with a gray beard, his eyes proud and warm. Vesemir. But when he blinked, the image was gone. He smiled faintly. "Farewell, old friend." Then he turned to Milva. "Let's go home." The two riders vanished into the storm, leaving Kaer Morhen behind, a fortress once cursed, now at peace. And in the high, cold wind, the last whisper of the oath lingered, fading at last into silence. Winter deepened its hold upon the north. The mountains slumbered beneath their white shrouds, and the valleys lay still, filled with the long hush that followed storm and ruin. Days passed like ghosts, uncounted. When at last the snows thinned and the rivers stirred beneath their glassy skin, Geralt and Milva rode again, eastward this time, away from Kaer Morhen, down into the world of men. Behind them the keep slept in silence. No fire burned in its halls, no laughter echoed through its stones. Yet something had changed in that ancient fortress. The air no longer carried the taste of curses, and for the first time in years, the wolves that haunted the crags came close to its walls without fear. The oath was gone, scattered to wind and memory. They rode through the foothills, where the first thaw had turned the land to mud. The rivers ran swollen, loud, and brown, carrying branches and bones downstream. Geralt said little. His thoughts were turned inward, toward the thing that had bound him for so long, and the strange emptiness its absence left behind. Milva watched him more than once, curiosity tugging at her. At last, on the third day, as the sun broke through a rent in the clouds, she spoke. "You've been quiet again," she said. "More than usual?"
He gave a non-committal grunt, eyes on the road. She pressed on. Does it feel different? To be free of it? Geralt considered the question a long moment. Different, yes, he said at last. But freedom isn't the same as peace. The oath is gone, but its echo remains. It will always remain. Kaer Morhen forged it in steel and blood. Some things don't vanish, they fade. Milva smirked faintly. It sounds like a philosopher talking. Vesemir used to say that, Geralt murmured, back when we still believed the world could be mended by killing its monsters. She eyed him sidelong. You don't believe that anymore? He shook his head. I believe monsters come in too many shapes. Some wear claws, some crowns, and some carry swords. They reached a stretch of forest where spring had begun to wake the earth. Buds clung to the branches, and the smell of thawed soil mingled with wood smoke from distant villages. Here and there, signs of rebuilding marked the land, charred ruins replaced by new timber, fields cleared of bones. War had passed through but not destroyed all. At a crossroads, they stopped. A weathered post stood there, its signs half buried in frost. One arrow pointed west to Brugge, another south to Rivia. Milva smiled faintly. Home? Geralt's eyes followed the southern road. If such a thing still exists, you've got friends there, people who'd be glad to see you alive. He looked toward the mountains they'd left behind, and ghosts who won't care either way. They rode on. By dusk, they reached a small village nestled along a bend of the river. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the smell of bread drifted on the wind. The sight was almost strange to them, peaceful, ordinary. They dismounted before the inn, a low timber building with a faded sign swinging from its beam. The Hanged Pike. Inside, warmth greeted them, along with a hum of voices. Peasants drank at the tables, a bard plucked at a lute, and a fire burned in the hearth. For the first time in weeks, the tension in Geralt's shoulders eased. The innkeeper, a broad woman with a quick smile, greeted them at once. God's bless travelers. Haven't seen a witcher in an age.
You'll find welcome here, if your coin's clean. Geralt nodded, unbuckling his cloak. It is. Milva grinned. He's got plenty. The man just never spends it. They took a table near the fire. The warmth soaked through their clothes, driving away the mountain chill. When the ale came, Milva drank deep and sighed. By the gods, I'd forgotten what comfort tastes like. Geralt gave a small smile. Don't get used to it. Comfort never lasts. Before she could retort, the bard's song caught his ear. It was an old tune, one he hadn't heard in years, a ballad of witchers, half legend and half lie. The verses spoke of monsters slain and maidens saved, of silver blades gleaming in moonlight, yet beneath the embroidery of words there was a thread of truth. Milva noticed the look in his eyes. Something wrong? He shook his head. No, just, memories. The night deepened. Snow began to fall again outside, soft and unhurried. Around them, the inn's patrons laughed and argued, the sound of their lives filling the room like music. Later, when the fire had burned low and most of the crowd had stumbled off to their beds, Geralt sat staring into the embers. Milva dozed beside him, her head resting on folded arms. The sword, his sword, not the cursed one, lay across his knees. Its steel caught the last glimmer of firelight. He turned it slowly, watching the reflections dance. Once that blade had been his whole world, a tool, a companion, a curse of its own kind. He had thought he'd grow numb to its weight,
Yet now, in the hush, between one life and another, he felt something stir within him. Weariness, yes, but also something smaller, quieter, hope. A voice broke the stillness. "You look as though you've seen the end of the world, Witcher." Geralt looked up. The bard stood there, lute slung over his shoulder, a half smile on his lips. "It's been ending for years," Geralt said. The bard chuckled.
"Aye, but it never quite finishes, does it? The world's got a habit of surviving its own ruin." He gestured to the empty chair. "Mind if I sit?" Geralt shrugged. The bard lowered himself onto the bench. "I've sung about you," he said. "Maybe not you exactly, but your kind. The white wolf, the monster slayer, the wanderer who never stays. Is it true what they say, that witchers have no hearts?" Geralt smiled faintly. "If we didn't, we'd sleep better." The bard studied him a moment, then nodded. "Fair answer." He stood and slung his lute again. "Rest well, Witcher. You've earned it, by the look of you." When he was gone, Geralt sat a while longer. The embers dimmed, the room grew colder. Milva stirred, murmuring in her sleep. Geralt rose quietly, stepped outside. The night was still. Snow blanketed the roofs and the river gleamed faintly under the moon. He stood there a long while, breathing in the cold, listening to the hush of the world. Somewhere far off a wolf howled, long and low, not of menace but of kinship. Geralt closed his eyes. For the first time in many winters, the sound did not fill him with loneliness. He turned toward the road that led south. Soon they would travel again. They always did. But for now the path was his alone, free of curse and burden, a road unwritten. He sheathed his sword and whispered into the falling snow, not as an oath, but as a promise to no one but himself. Let peace hold, though the heart fails. The wind took the words, carried them across the river, over the sleeping fields, and into the endless dark, where all vows, broken and kept alike, were finally the same. Dawn crept quietly over the valley, pale and golden, touching the frost-silvered trees with its first light. The snow that had fallen in the night melted on the eaves of the inn, dripping in slow, steady rhythm. And smoke rose from chimneys to curl lazily into the brightening sky. Geralt was already awake. He sat outside on the bench beneath the bare oak, sharpening his steel sword with slow, deliberate strokes. The rasp of stone against metal was steady, unhurried, a sound as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Each pull of the whetstone caught the rising sun, setting small sparks to dance upon the blade's edge. Milva joined him, still yawning, wrapped in a cloak too thin for the cold. "You're up before the crows," she muttered, rubbing her eyes. "Couldn't sleep?" "Didn't try." She gave a half smile. "You never do." She sat beside him, tucking her knees close against her chest. "So what now? We've no more curses to break, no captains to fight, no ghosts whispering in your ear." Geralt tested the sword's edge against his thumb, nodded once. "The world's large," he said. "There's always something." Milva frowned. "And when there isn't?" He looked toward the horizon, where the river gleamed like a blade drawn from its sheath. "Then I'll find peace, maybe." "Peace," she echoed, the word almost foreign on her tongue. "You think witchers get that?" Geralt sheathed the sword. "I think we get what we earn, and I've earned a little." For a while they sat in silence, watching the village wake. A boy ran across the square chasing a dog, a baker's apprentice swept snow from the step, and a woman hung, washing on a line that glittered with frost. Ordinary things. Small things.
yet somehow they felt precious, as if the world were holding its breath after too much grief. When they went back inside, the innkeeper had already laid out bread, cheese, and a pot of steaming broth. "On the house," she said with a wink, "for a witcher who doesn't frighten the children and a lady with the eyes of a hawk." Milva laughed. "See, Geralt? Your reputation's improving." "Doubt it," he muttered, though a faint smile touched his lips. They ate in companionable quiet. When they finished, Milva leaned back, crossing her arms. "You know, I might stay here a while, hunt for the village, maybe teach the boy with the dog to shoot straight. A place like this could use a steady hand." Geralt regarded her for a long moment. "You'd do well here. And you?" He finished his ale and set the mug down. "There's still work in the world. Monsters don't care much for peace." She studied him, eyes narrowing. "You're not coming back, are you?" He hesitated. "I don't know." Milva sighed. "You're a strange one, Witcher. You break a curse older than kingdoms and think yourself unworthy of a warm hearth." "I'm not made for hearths," he said simply. She stood, slung her bow across her shoulder. "Then at least promise me you'll come back someday, when the road's kinder and your heart less heavy." He rose as well, pulling on his gloves. "I'll try." They stepped outside together. The morning air was sharp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and thawing snow. Horses waited by the stable, stamping impatiently. Geralt checked Roach's bridle, murmuring a word that only she would understand. The mare flicked her ears, nuzzling his hand. Milva adjusted her cloak. "So this is goodbye then?" "For now." She smiled faintly. "You always say that." He met her gaze. "Because it's always true." They clasped hands, rough palms against rough palms, an unspoken pact between two who had seen too much and survived it anyway. Then Milva turned toward the village, her figure soon lost among the trees. Geralt watched her go until she vanished from sight. When she was gone, he mounted Roach and turned her toward the east. The path wound through the woods, dappled with sunlight and shadow. Somewhere beyond lay the plains of Rivia, and beyond that perhaps another contract, another beast, another chapter in the endless rhythm of life and death. The wind carried the faint murmur of voices behind him, the laughter of villagers beginning their day. It was a sound he would remember, though he would never admit it aloud. He rode for hours, through forest and field, past streams swollen with meltwater, and over bridges that creaked beneath the weight of time. The land changed slowly, snow giving way to mud, mud to grass. The air smelled of spring. At midday he stopped by a stone marker at the crossroads. It was old, half-buried, inscribed with runes too worn to read. Yet as he brushed the lichen away, he saw a faint symbol carved into its face, a wolf's head, weathered by centuries. He smiled. "Seems the past doesn't vanish after all." Roach stamped the ground impatiently. Geralt took one last look north, where the mountains stood like gray teeth against the horizon. Then he turned away. By evening, he reached the edge of a forest where the trees stood tall and dark, their branches whispering with the promise of rain. He made camp there, building a small fire and unstrapping his swords. The steel blade gleamed dully. The silver one, his old companion, was whole again, free of runes, free of burden. He sat long by the fire, staring into the flames. The silence of the wild pressed close, but it was no longer heavy. It was simply silence, and for once he welcomed it. Somewhere in the distance, a nightjar called, its song rising and falling like breath. Geralt leaned back against a fallen log, closed his eyes and let the sound carry him. He dreamed not of battles or curses, but of Kaer Morhen beneath the snow, of Vesemir's steady voice, of laughter echoing in cold halls. He saw Milva smiling by the fire, Ciri running through the courtyard, the ghosts of friends and foes alike standing beneath the stars. When he woke, the fire had burned low. Dawn was creeping over the horizon again, the air alive with the scent of rain. He rose, packed his things, and saddled Roach. Before mounting, he looked once more toward the distant mountains. "Goodbye," he murmured.
"And thank you." The wind answered in a whisper that might have been words or merely the sigh of trees. The oath holds, though the heart fails. Geralt smiled faintly. "Aye, but this heart still beats." He swung into the saddle and Roach started forward. The road stretched ahead, long and winding, shimmering with morning light. And though no one saw him ride that day, the villagers who lived by the river would later say they heard a horse's hooves passing through the mist, and a voice humming a low, wordless tune, a song of endings and beginnings, of steel and peace, of a man who kept his oaths, even when none remained to bind him. Thus rode Geralt of Rivia once more into legend beneath a sky washed clean by dawn, the ghost behind him fading at last into memory.